everybody. Welcome back to the ProfNoctis show, and we are in for a special DLC installment, I guess, of the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Lecture Series that we finished up last semester. As you know, we finished up this kind of comprehensive series on Rebirth last semester, but there's still more to this game, and there's more creators, and there's more to dissect, and we've got 3 years to wait. And so we're going to continue interviewing more and more people. So I am here, as always, with my co-host, Evan.
Hey, everyone. Hope everything is going great in your life.
Yeah, and today we are so excited to have with us one of the surprises of this entire content creation journey of us that we've been on. A guy that you may know from his 9-hour tome video, I would call. His name is AJ, and we are so excited to have him. He has created a video, like I said, it's 9 hours, story beat by story beat, chapter by chapter, analysis, detail, minutia, everything you can imagine about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We're so excited to have you here. How are you today, AJ?
I'm great. I'm really excited to be able to talk about, I mean, like you said, 9-hour video that this game inspired. So I could, and I was kind of cutting a little bit when we got to the final length. So I could talk about this forever with all sorts of different people, and I'm really excited to do it with you guys today. I think there's so much, we have, like you said, years till the next release, and I think there's so many things to dig into. I don't think there's any stone that we can't turn over and find something new to talk about. So I'm just really excited. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into the Rebirth stuff, which I'm really excited about, I've watched every second and then multiple rewatches of segments of that videos. I'm champing at the bit to get to it. But before we get into that, who are you? What do you do? Talk about your content creation, and how can people get to know you a little better?
So my online name is Aleczandxr, but I tend to go by AJ. I've been creating YouTube video essays since mid-2016, and I've been streaming on Twitch for a little over 3 years now. I started doing it just kind of to explain, on an anime called Fate Zero, I kind of just wanted to explain to my friends why this show was good, and kind of prove it to them. And that was meant just for my friends, but people found the video and asked for my takes on other anime or other video games and that sort of thing, and it's snowballed from there, and I'm grateful to be able to call it my career now. After about a year, I guess, of doing pretty exclusively anime stuff, one or two exceptions aside, video games are my biggest passion, so I branched out into doing that, started with Final Fantasy. I might have done 6 or 9 or 15 or something, and then ultimately got to starting to do remake stuff and 7 stuff. And I have a really interesting relationship with 7, so it's just been a joy to talk about this, and I'm glad that it's led me to meet people like you guys, like-minded people like you.
Okay, so you said that you've made your first video because you wanted to prove to your friends that something was good. And they were like, it's not very good. And you said, it is good. And here's a 9-hour video. No. How long was the first video that you made? It's surely not 9 hours, right?
No, it was 45, 50 minutes altogether.
That's pretty substantial for a first video. That's a good start. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is about your personality that helps you to have this passion for this kind of detailed insight, and what it looks like for you, and why it's important for you to kind of substantiate it with these long-form explanations?
Yeah, I think this is actually something that I've only properly realized about myself in the last 2 to 3 years. Yeah. But really what I think it comes from is that it's not necessarily that what I like is good, and if people say that it's bad, I need to prove them wrong so my thing can look better. You know, it's not that spiteful or insecure or anything like that, but it's essentially that I think in the last, I don't know, I've been on the internet properly for about 15 years or something, and in the last few years I've noticed that people can be very dismissive and disrespectful about artists and writers and their intent, and less celebratory than I think we all should be, and appreciative. And so I've kind of what I try to do with my content is give every story I experience absolutely every chance to impress me and connect with me, and try to look for every possible interpretation to enjoy it as much as possible. And my way of doing that is going, okay, here's this awesome character in this video game I love. These are the reasons why I think they're great. This is one of my favorite anime. These are the reasons that it connects with me. Maybe it will help a viewer better appreciate it. Maybe it's something they haven't thought about before. So basically, I just try to be a conduit between the viewer and greater appreciation for whatever the topic is, because I think that in the modern internet age, basically any story could do with that, and more positivity is always great. So I try to sort of foster that sort of discourse in my own little space and my community.
I love that. The appreciation for the art and the artist, even if you don't necessarily connect with the entire product, being able to find, certain characters or nuanced moments or parts of the story that you feel like could apply to other folks and to share what you appreciated about it is super admirable. And you choose what you put out in the world. I mean, you make a deliberate choice to consume something, and then you're taking that and you're shaping it in a positive lens so that people can appreciate it more, right? So there's a redirection of energy there that I think is really special. Rather than just responding or living in what the culture is of the discourse, you're saying, the only way that this conversation changes is if we approach it with some different intentionality. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super admirable. Wade, I know that you spend a lot of time doing that with your students. What are you curious about here?
Yeah, I'm curious about your history before making that first video. Was that your first attempt at a video? Had you done videoing before, video editing, any sort of thing like that? What's your background in that realm?
Honestly, outside of I guess it is probably pretty important, but I just did really fun, cringy, just recordings with my friends that we would put together. Like we did, I don't know, when I was 10, 11, we did like a retelling of different Harry Potter books where we'd film ourselves being different characters and stuff like that. So I knew a bit of editing from that because I did a lot of that when I was really young. Outside of that, I just had a bit of a fascination with my high school English classes. And specifically in my last year of high school, I really got into that. But outside of that, I had no training, no background, just kind of a passion for stories that spontaneously arose in me 10-ish years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I talk to people that are in the content creation space, nobody has like the same origin story, right? Everybody's like, I did this sort of thing. For me, I remember Mario 64 was the first experience that I had with kind of cinematic gameplay storytelling.
Wow, yeah,
because
wahoo.
This is wild because, like, if you remember, I don't know if you've ever played 64.
I have, yeah.
Okay. But you can press a button and lock the camera, and I would just place the camera in ridiculous places, and then I would cinematically move Mario. And then, like, I had, y'all, I'm dating myself. I put out a VCR, okay? And I would record clips of me doing this and try to like splice them together. Now, you should understand, I never wanted to be a content creator, but that was something that I did in my middle school years, which was really interesting. The reason that I bring that up is because watching your video, you have such a masterful way of telling a story. And it made me think to myself, what has he read? What has he learned? How does he have all of this knowledge? Are you a researcher by nature? Do you this is impressive to me as a teacher. So talk to me a little bit about when you're setting forth to make a video, how much research is involved, or how much do you just innately know and draw from your own history?
It's entirely contextual. So, for example, I'm currently working on, or just finished a video on a character from an anime, and I know this anime back to front, and it's a 12-minute video. Oh. This, I really just need to look up a couple panels or scenes just to double-check that I'm remembering a line properly. But otherwise, it's all from memory. The bigger projects that are an hour or 2 or 9, I make sure, like... The one thing I do when I set out to make a video, no matter how long it is to like, what is the point? What is a point or 2 or 3 core points that I want to get across, and how is the best way to do that justice? Like I didn't think to myself, I want to make a 9-hour video. I just thought I want to properly explain why Rebirth is so great, while also saying a couple things that I don't like, but it's mostly analysis and praise and celebration.
Yeah.
I just want to prove these things, why it stuck out to me, why all of this being communicated in this way is so masterful. And it just ended up being that long. I just talk about everything as long as I feel it merits discussion. Yeah. And sometimes that requires research. Like Rebirth is very subtextual in lots of ways. It's very derivative. It goes all over the place, and you can find connections to all sorts of philosophy and psychology and external sources. So I think Rebirth merits that, especially with regards to the points I was making. But some other ones don't really require it that much if my point doesn't require that much research. So it's all very contextual, just all in honor of, I guess, celebrating whatever the topic is.
Speaking of context, you do a lot of live streaming in addition to this more curated, pre-recorded content. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of what makes each of those mediums special and what you view makes them distinct. What's the difference between doing a live stream and being able to interact and then kind of doing more long-form pre-recorded content? Because you have a significant commitment to both, which I think usually everybody kind of picks one lane or the other. And for you, you're really committed to both of these, and they don't seem to have a ton of overlap. They're pretty unique in your approach. So do you view them as two different lanes in that way? And what makes those kind of different mediums special as you've experienced it?
Yeah, I think actually switching to streaming when I did was very necessary for me, because if you watch my videos, I love doing them, and I will continue to love doing them, and they're a part of me, like they're an essential part of me. But they're very formal. They're quite they're formal. They're quite serious a lot of the time. Very analytical, very cutting, and that's a part of me, but there's also a whole other part to me that's very that can be really stupid and silly and over the top sometimes, and much more casual. And so starting to stream, sort of, I think creates a more intimate connection with the people who watch than by me being that transit between greater appreciation for a story. What I tend to do with streams is play a video game blind, so people can see my first reaction to it as I try to analyze it as I go with it blind. Read a manga blind. A lot of it's blind stuff, and there is some intersection with, sometimes I read a manga and I go, oh, I want to make a video on this, and people can sort of connect where I made certain points in my live experience to the video. But you're right in that they're very different. And I just think everyone's multifaceted, everyone has different aspects to their personality and how they want to live life, and I think I would have burnt out if all I did was video essays. I was close to burning out, I think, and then doing streaming was just a breath of fresh air that I really appreciated. And I think it's the same philosophy with what I want to get across, but just a totally different approach to it.
Can you tell us a little bit about that time when you felt like you were burning out? How did you identify it, and how did you kind of brainstorm this idea for a shift?
Yeah, I think in my experience, I think burnout, it's like I have experienced proper burnout maybe 4 or 5 times since I started, and I think I almost always realize it too late. Like once the tangible effects of it come to the fore, and you address them, and it's like, I'm just exhausted. I think I need weeks off because I realized this too late and my body just won't go. So I think realizing certain things about it, like, oh, I've been a little bit tired lately. I've just not been in the mood to talk about this story that I love to death lately. Those sorts of things crop up, and I'm never perfect at identifying it, but that makes me go, okay, I love this story. I should want to talk about it. I should want to share something about it. Maybe I should take a day off, take a week off. Maybe I should just lay off a bit and then recenter.
AJ, I'm so glad that you said that. We have a lot of content creators, a lot of aspiring people in various professions, and even game developers that watch this show. And most people identify burnout when it's like deep in it, because they think that it's like this season of depression, and they correspond that with something much, much greater. But you've just said, I'm tired and I just feel exhausted talking about this thing that I love. And so when something that you love is no longer satisfying and fulfilling for you, that's a key sign of burnout for you. And that's a really helpful metric for all of us. I think I've felt that even with something like Rebirth, which I absolutely adore. So,
well, I'm curious about kind of that process in the burnout cycle, because if we look at the burnout cycle, well, popular interpretation I think has 8 stages, and depression is the final stage of the burnout cycle, right? So if the only time we recognize that we're burned out is when we hit that depression, we've missed some of those earlier markers. AJ, you described that you've started to be able to recognize those markers earlier and earlier before they get deeper and deeper into those different, I think you said there's kind of 5 unique times that you've identified that you've kind of experienced that burnout.
Something like that, yeah.
What is it that has helped you to start to identify that earlier? Like, what gave you the power and the strength to be able to say, okay, actually, I'm starting to see the early stages. Like, we're on the ground floor of burnout here, and now I know how to circumvent it because I don't just have to wait till I crash into that depression or sadness or kind of apathy part of it, but I'm recognizing this on the early side, so I'm kind of able to maintain it and have a more maintenance relationship with kind of your workflow and burnout. What were those things that helped you identify that earlier, and talk us through what that process was? Kind of shift that lens, not just to the end, to the big consequences, but really it sounds like you were a little more proactive in taking care of yourself in that way now.
Yeah, I think I've had to be, just to stay healthy. But I actually think it coincided with streaming, because I think the telltale sign for me was, I don't even remember what I was streaming, but it was something I really enjoyed. And usually I'm very enthusiastic about this stuff, and I could consciously recognize this writing is great, this presentation is great. I'm like, whoa, this is impressive. But I didn't feel it, and I feel stories very strongly. More so than being impressed, I tend to connect with it. I tend to not automatically, but just instinctively connect with something that's powerful. And then I'm very heart first and then head after. I tear up. I get really excited. I feel something. And then later that night I go, okay, why did I feel that way? But I always feel first. And that's just how I enjoy doing stuff. What happened with streaming is that I would be thinking first. Like I wouldn't be feeling, I'd just be being like, oh, this is well put together. And people in my chat would be like, oh my gosh, I'm tearing up. This is amazing. And I'd be like, yeah, this is great. But I never felt it. And sometimes, maybe that isn't burnout sometimes. Sometimes you just don't connect with a story in the same way others do. But for this specific thing, it felt like something that I really should. Wow. And the discrepancy between how other people would react and how they assumed I would react and how I thought I would react and how I was actually feeling really, I guess, concerned me a little bit. Yeah. And then I knew how I felt then. I felt fatigued. I felt tired. I felt a bit comparatively joyless. Yeah. And then so whenever that crops up, I go, okay, this is a sign. Don't let this snowball, and maybe take a little bit of a break.
I love that you recognize that through the gaps, right? There's a gap in what you expected your response to be and what others' response was. And so you said, okay, I recognize there's a gap here, so this is an early warning sign that this should be something that I like. If we were to relate it to food, I love ramen. And then you're like, oh, I never want to eat ramen. Well, it's because I ate ramen for 14 days straight, right? I'm oversaturated. Like my taste preferences just need a little variety, or something's off, or maybe I'm getting sick, right? That gap between what I love and then not wanting to do what I love, and especially the nuanced way that you experience stories, I imagine that you can find it in different ways too. Like you start to see it and like, oh, I don't connect with this character who's doing this redemption arc because I have some unresolved conflict in my life and I don't want to deal with it. So I'm kind of being avoidant of this particular theme, right? I wonder, I'm curious, and I know we don't have time to talk about it, what the level of minutia that you would get into with that with your own psyche. But Wade, I know that you have some questions about Rebirth. One of the things that Rebirth deals with as a game is that it is kind of that burnout. And then there's a definitive middle where they kind of separate and have to recreate in order to reapproach some of their problems. That felt like a really interesting tonal shift. So I'm excited to talk about that in the future. Wade, I don't want to jump right into all of the Rebirth talk, but I think it's a very fitting theme for us to be discussing as we kind of have AJ on to talk about this.
Well, certainly, as you're talking about, I've heard so many people, even people that we've had as guests, talk about their experience with Rebirth, where it starts and they're like, man, I'm really into this. And then about halfway through, they start to burn out, maybe because of what they might call minigame fatigue or side quest, but more like Chadley fatigue. I think for a lot of people, they call it that. World intel and stuff. But it's a really interesting thing because, like, I personally never had that moment of burnout, and yet many of my close friends are like, man, I am so tired of some of these things. I love these things, and these things are really sort of thing. When it comes to something like a game, not like content creation or anything like that, have you ever burned out on a game that you really loved and you wanted to see through to the end, but how did you push through in that kind of burnout with something that's recreation?
Yeah, I never felt that with Rebirth. I maybe started to feel a tiny bit of fatigue with it, but never really anything palpable. Like
by the
I never
time
had
you
that.
get to Nibelheim, they mercifully pull back on some of the extra stuff, and I think that was smart on their part.
Yeah, it was around Nibelheim where I'm just like, okay, if this is great, but if they go a bit further with this, I might need to skip out on some of the side stuff for my own experience. So I didn't have it with Rebirth, but I have had it with games throughout the years. And what I tend to do is focus on the reason I was... Well, basically, if I don't see any reason to continue, if I feel no excitement, if I'm forcing myself, I just drop it. Like, life's too short. For whatever reason, you don't connect with everything. But if there is something, if there is even a semblance of something that encourages me to be like, I want to see how this pays off, how this plays out, I kind of weigh how much I connect with that aspect to the aspects I don't like as much, or that are burning me out. And if it ends up being canceling each other out, I take a break. I take a month or something. If I'm just going, these things are annoying or they're fatiguing, but I really, really love this character and I want to see where they go. It outweighs the negatives, and I just keep pushing through. And it's like this internal barometer of, am I forcing myself? And if I feel like I'm not, I can keep going. But if I feel like I am, you got to stop, because not only is it fatiguing and tiring, but I think you're coloring your own experience and not being fair to the work.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great way of saying it. There's been several games like that for me where, I know that it's a good game, and I know that it, like, a lot of people may love it, but halfway through it, I'm just like, this is not for me, right? But I want to see it through to the end, Evan's laughing because there's one game in particular that is exactly it. So
great.
In any case,
sorry.
Please.
No, I did you follow up?
No, go for it.
I will now go. You consume a significant amount of media. I think it's probably fair to say you're in like the top echelon of probably humans on the planet for media consumption, because you're doing it professionally as well as your hobby now.
Right.
I'm curious how you balance enjoying things and then needing and wanting to make content for them.
Yeah. You need to compartmentalize that. You cannot... There needs to be a healthy balance of both. I think just everything in life, there needs to be a balance. And sometimes I could be better at practicing what I preach. But when it comes to media specifically and what you're talking about, just being a content creator, I think it's a blessing and a privilege that people want to consume your content and hear your opinions about any given story. That's something that we can really take for advantage, and that I think it's always important to remember that is something to be grateful for. But at the same time, it's also something that I think content creators can get a bit of imposter syndrome, and I think you should realize sometimes that people want to hear your thoughts on it because you're probably good at it, and like you have something valuable to say. And so I think it's just, you need to sort of respect yourself and realize what's good for you, and what people can do that can sometimes snowball into something unhealthy for a content creator is want content on everything. Like, I tweet about, I very purposely go, this is a stream game, this is a off-stream game. Like Rebirth, Re-Trilogy, I'm doing all off-stream. I don't want to have chat up. I want to be dark room, big screen TV,
Immersed.
that's it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But some other games, I can be just as immersed with chat and with Twitch. But it all depends, and you need to divide, at least me, I need to divide it. And obviously, like I said, it's a privilege for people to want to see or hear your thoughts and want a video essay on everything, but you really got to draw the line and be like, nope, this is just leisure, this is just fun. When I say my top whatever things I've experienced this year, I'll include it and I'll talk about it, but it'll be very casual, non-analytical, because you need to be balanced. Otherwise, I think for me, that would be absolutely something that would lead to burnout. So it's about drawing that line and giving yourself work stuff and non-work stuff.
Giving yourself permission.
Good
wow.
boundaries.
That's
good boundaries.
Such a good boundary. And to say, like, I'm the same way. I knew that I didn't want to play Rebirth on stream because then you're worried about reactions and, like, is this entertaining for people? But, like, when it comes to a game like that, let's really immerse ourselves. So I want to shift into some Final Fantasy VII talk.
I have one question before.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you mind? This is my final. I'm too curious, and I can't. I've been putting it off and putting it off.
Yeah.
Where does this come from, and what are your influences for your speaking and delivery style? Because Wade brought it up that you have a very informed, really well curated delivery style where you're shaping your argument and then kind of delivering it and then substantiating it along the way. That has a really great natural flow. And so when we talk to folks, sometimes we'll talk to folks who do pre-recorded content and they have a more performative approach to their content. And so in conversation, there's a speaking style that's really different. You are identical. It is
It's true.
Truly, like, it feels like you just hit record and then just talks for 9 hours straight because of the way that you're answering these questions and your diction, your meter, the way that you're substantiating your arguments, you're bringing in empathy, you're including people, you're catching yourself, like using a universal we and then talking personally for yourself, but recognizing other people could feel the same way. There's a lot of balance to your delivery. What are your influences for how and why you speak the way that you do, and how did you get how you are?
How you are.
It's so funny because all the things you said that I just did, none of it was consciously. Like, I didn't realize that I did the universal we or any of that. But I guess it's just become second nature with. I think it's a byproduct of first thing with regards to how I deliver things, specifically in video essays, because it is more formal and more cutting there, but I really want to enunciate and be clear. Like, I really don't like when I mumble or things like that.
Right.
So it's just about clarity, because if you want to communicate something, you have to seem confident and you have to be clear. You don't want someone not understanding the words you're saying. And I think I've spent quite a few years trying to do that without being super wooden. Yeah.
What did conversations look like at home for you? Like,
very different from this.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm like, did you have a friend group that you involved? Did you guys debate a lot when you were friends, and so you had to substantiate your arguments with evidence? Obviously, you got so fed up with them at one point you just decided to make a video, right? But there's a very deliberative style that you have. Is that intentional? And what has influenced you to be so deliberative in your delivery?
It's absolutely intentional, but I have I think it's because I didn't have this when I was growing up. It was very casual. My parents are very casual. The closest thing is my dad's very similar to me in that he's very analytical. He's very cerebral in the way he communicates things. And I think I get that a bit from him. But in terms of the way I communicate with people throughout my, I don't know, up until end of high school-ish, it was very casual. It was super casual. But in terms of influence, people always ask me things like this, and I feel bad because a lot of it's just self-taught. It's just, how would I want to hear? I don't have much advice about influences because I just think, how would I want to have a content creator speak? And I would want them to be clear, direct, cutting, elaborate, but not too redundant. And the main thing, I think, is empathy, being empathetic. Streaming has also, and just being in comments on YouTube has helped me to learn that you can't I've unintentionally isolated groups of people by the way I speak. I talked about the anime Death Note, and I said people are tribalistic and do this, and someone's like, well, I'm not like that, and I go, okay, well,
it's pretty tribalistic of you.
Yeah, and that's an extreme example, but I just went like, when I'm speaking, you got to think of, obviously people can be unreasonable sometimes, and you shouldn't cede to insane comments like that, but
fair.
The average person of a marginalized group shouldn't see the things I'm saying, or if the things I'm saying don't apply to them, and not feel seen. So I just try to open up every avenue and be like, this is how I feel, you might feel differently, that's cool too, and just make it a welcoming, make my community a welcoming one, and the first roadblock for that is the way I talk. So that's just what I try to do the most.
I love it. Well, I'll say this, and Wade's going to talk about this more, and I think this is probably a good transition into some of the specifics with Rebirth in the video. You are very talented, and one of the things that comes with talent is, yes, you can develop it, but there's this unconscious competence that comes with things that you just have natural talent for. And then when you start to develop them, then you kind of arrive where I think that you've arrived in a very natural style that you don't think about because you've made some very conscious decisions along the way to cultivate that. So here I say thank you for the stuff that you're making, and thank you for sharing that talent and that passion with us and with others. It's really great to see, and it's encouraging, and the more people that have that attitude, the more that shapes what that online discourse that you're talking about that you originally wanted to impact and influence. So just to frame it, looking back, you're shaping that discourse, and that helps people engage with the things that they enjoy more and really connect with others around them. So providing a way to facilitate that, I think, is really special, and I think it's really meaningful in the world, and it's not lost on us. We just did an interview where we talked about how we live in a mixed reality. We live in a hybrid, virtual, personal space, and so when those wires get crossed, sometimes it can be challenging, but if we know how to navigate it well, and we consume content and work on ourselves, like content like yours, we're able to really actually appreciate things more, and it benefits our in-person reality just as much as our digital reality in the way that those things are mixed. So I think it's just meaningful to me personally that you would take the time to do that. So thanks. So Wade, I know that you have a lot of nice things to say about the video, and I know we want to get into Rebirth, but thank you for sharing that with us too.
Thank you for saying so. That's very nice of you.
AJ, you speak with such gravitas, and it's not just your style, but you speak as someone that has definitive opinions, and it's fortified by evidence and point-by-point analysis, and I really appreciate that about your videos, and especially the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth video. I think, as Evan has already alluded to, the way that you present yourself certainly delivers that same level of gravitas. I'm reminded of something one of my dissertation advisors said to me. Said, if you are making an assertion and no one disagrees with you, you haven't made an assertion. You've just repeated and regurgitated what everyone already knew.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so that sort of discourse and bristling that happens, that means that you've kind of pushed something forward in some ways. And I really appreciate that about so much of what you've done. At the same time, you lavish praise on the game. So when we move into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in our discussion, I'm drawn to something you said at the very beginning of this interview, where you said you have an interesting relationship with Final Fantasy VII. I'm really curious what that means.
Yeah, I got into it just so I know. Did you watch my remake video or no?
I have skimmed your remake video, but I really focused on Rebirth.
Okay,
you mentioned the remake video several times, and I was like, that needs to go on the docket, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, so, yeah, no problem, because in there I talked about this, but just didn't repeat it in Rebirth. Mm-hmm. Basically, I got into JRPGs in around 2012, 2013, when my friend introduced me to them, and I started with FF6, Chrono Trigger, FF4, played a few of them, and then got into 7.
Gosh, the
boy, did he start the right way!
You sure did.
Gosh.
That was
why
my
did you,
pipeline.
Why? Yeah. Why did you do that? Why that order?
Yeah.
His recommendations, my friend's recommendations.
Well, your friend is a real one.
He was. He also screwed up my expectations because I'm like, every JRPG like this?
Everything will pale after that.
Well, you're always gonna kill God. So yeah,
that's right. So yeah, 7 I got into After a few, it was an early one, but I had played, I don't know, 10, 15 JRPGs before it. And I got into it, and I knew the main plot points, but very little outside of that. And I knew it was basically the most popular, the most iconic game in the franchise, and I was really excited to see why. I played it. I really, really liked it. But for a few reasons that I won't get into specifically, just for the sake of time, and I've talked about it in the remake video, I couldn't wholeheartedly adore it. I never fell in love with the world. I never fell in love with the characters. I did to an extent, but it's like, the way I put it is, it was a top 25, 30 game, and I was frustrated that it wasn't a top 5 or 10 game for me.
Can I just push pause real quick? For context specific, when you played it in the time the game had been out for quite a while, what format did you play it on?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think that's important context for shaping it, because the game had been out for almost 15, 20 years at that point. Yeah.
I played it on my PS3 just through buying the old on the PS Store. Yeah.
So it wasn't like the remaster or PC version or anything like that.
Yeah.
Did they make the remaster? What am I saying here?
They've done a remaster
that was the
version, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Cool. Well, that's great context, because it was very cutting edge for the time, and then they did nothing to update it, and so it's a lot of this.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that bothered me, because I think I'm a big fan of the presentation. Like, I love the background art. I don't mind the blocky style, but it was like, obviously the localization and the translation, that's been well documented, why there are limitations for that. I think that was a big part of the reason that I couldn't connect. I felt like there was a barrier between me and the characters. And I just didn't love the world for a reason I couldn't really explain, and I was frustrated by that. Because people said, this is my favorite game of all time, this is top 5, this changed my life, and I felt like I missed the boat. And then so when Re-Trilogy came out, when the remake announcement came out, I was the most excited, one of the most excited people on the planet. Because I'm like, not that my favorite game is going to be reimagined, it was maybe this is my pathway into loving the world of FF7.
I love this.
Yeah, and it was. Long story short, it was. So Remake is one of the most important games I've ever played in my life. Even though I like Rebirth more, Remake was more significant for me because it helped me love the world. The nuanced localization, the voice acting, the reimagining of Midgar, and the characters, and the body language, and the use of expressions, the direction, all of that was everything I wanted and more to help me connect with the world. And then I went back and I replayed 7, and I went, with the context of Re-Trilogy, or Remake at the time, this means more to me. I'm just more connected. The barrier was gone. So yeah, it's essentially just gave me a level of love and appreciation that I was jealous that others had, that I then obtained through Remake, and then Rebirth accentuated that.
What a distinct perspective.
It's great.
From what we had a lot of conversations around.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. Now, through your video, you mentioned several times that you are on the side of perspective that says that Remake the Remake trilogy, Remake, Rebirth, and whatever that is next, is more of I don't know if you would call it a sequel, but like a secondary edition of the original that doesn't overtake or negate the original game. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you came to that interpretation, and just, guide us through that.
I think sequel is too simplistic a term, but it's the closest term I think I can think of for it, because it's not, I'm not saying, and it's not as if someone completely blind to what FF7 is can play it and not love it, because there are countless examples of people who've never played it who adore it. My partner is one of those. My mom, I showed her Remake and didn't tell her anything and explained OG after, and she loved it. And so it's not that that's the case, but there are specific story beats in Remake and Rebirth that are dependent on the audience's reaction to discrepancies between something that happens and something you know to be true in the original timeline of the first one. So Zack appearing in Remake and surviving in Remake, without context of knowing where he goes, like, that moment which has a lot of people bawling and screaming, is completely confusing. It's just like, who's this guy? Why is he relieved that was all the men and he's survived? Like, okay, that's cool. Like, I don't know what that means. When Zack passes Aerith and Cloud, carrying Cloud to Midgar, there is so much emotional weight in that and their history. I also think Crisis Core is part of the chronology of the sequel. That it's just like, okay, there's something going on here. And Aerith describes her relationship with him in Rebirth, and you see it in the beginning of Rebirth with him seeing her unconscious body, but like, you cannot feel that and know the history there and the richness there without knowing where it came from. So I think there's a lot of emotional context that gets filled in. It's like maybe 10% of the game, and the vast majority you can appreciate and love. But that 10%, when you, like you guys were talking about, the minutiae is so important. I think the devil's in the details with the Re-Trilogy, and having that emotional context is just as important as having a spreadsheet of all the plot events that have happened and using that to come to a conclusion. Like, the Re-Trilogy is big on feel, and I've made theories and predictions just based on the tone of something. And I think not having the original context in certain scenes makes you miss out on some of the tone for that. So I think that's how I'd express that.
No, that's really good. You've mentioned several times in the video as well that a lot of this sequelization, timeline, world sort of thing, it's rooted in an ideology of the Lifestream. And this idea that the Lifestream is not necessarily like an afterlife or where souls simply go, but you mentioned that it's the seat, and you cite a specific NPC conversation in Cosmo Canyon, right? Where it talks about the wishes and the dreams and the hopes that have kind of manifested into realities of some kinds that exist, even though they're not your reality. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that? Help us to unpack that. I know that you did it for 9 hours, but give us a teaser of kind of what you got into there.
The 45-minute teaser.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the vision and identity of the Re-Trilogy of Remake and Rebirth is that it absolutely, in my opinion, respects and adores the original and maintains its spirit, but it adds these layers to it thematically, characterization-wise, in terms of the scope, that expand upon it and take it into new, exciting directions without ever betraying it. And the original has a very specific tone of hope in the face of doom that I think is really elaborated upon in Re-Trilogy. And so you take that sort of that expansion, yet staying true to the soul of it, and you apply that to the Lifestream. A big plot element of Re-Trilogy, I think, is that hope is literally a power in a more tangible form than it tends to be stated in most games or most stories.
Hope is a more tangible form in the Re-Trilogy than it is in most games. That's an interesting phrase that you used. I've not heard that phrasing. It's apt. It's good.
And I've experienced a couple other stories that use this sort of hope as genuine power idea, but the moment they start diving into the idea of this NPC in Cosmo Canyon saying, I've lost my parents, but maybe there's a way to see them again. Maybe they're not lost to me, and maybe through idealization and crystallization of those hopes, I can peer through the looking glass. The moment that gets introduced, this stuff is deliberate. There's no way. It is a bit obscure. You have to listen for a little bit, but there's no way they put that in there for no reason. And the moment that gets introduced, you start filling in the gaps for a lot of details throughout Rebirth that are a bit confusing or a bit vague, and you just kind of see the full mosaic, and you see that while the Lifestream is life energy and the cycle of life and death and rebirth and everything. A new dimension's been added to it, or a new idea. It doesn't mean that this is exactly what's going on, but it means that the developers are putting out there that it's a valid interpretation to think of it this way, and so you can theorize however you want to. That basically hopes and dreams can be made manifest. That I know that kind of jumps onto the Yogācāra collective unconscious idea a little bit, which we might talk about later. But the moment that's introduced, you add that to a lot of the different characters who are embodiments of hope or have something to say about hope. Cloud is in a constant battle with hope. Aerith, I think, is a really beautiful embodiment of hope. Zack, I think, is a personification of hope. And Sephiroth is the antithesis of hope. So I think just that world element helps you integrate it with a lot of the character work and then sort of realize the full picture of what the message here is. And it's just a beautiful new design that's just fascinating to think about for the world and what it means metaphysically. But also it helps you learn more about these characters and what their role is and theorize.
Yeah.
So video games are different than an anime or a television show, but they both tell stories in different ways. When you talk about hope as a central theme, one of the things that it makes me think of is, and it's not a direct opposite, but despair is another theme that has an interconnected relationship with this idea of hope in this game to me. That it's not necessarily a direct opposite, but it's something that is endured and gets through to get to hope. We have to recognize that there is despair and overcome it to get to hope. And a story that we would watch, like anime, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, one that you've written a lot about, has a lot of themes of kind of institutional despair and what it looks like for characters to band together and have hope. So the party mentality of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in some ways reminds me of what those characters kind of endure together in the rending, the tearing, the going apart, the coming together. But there's a difference when you're playing the character. In Fullmetal Alchemist, for example, we're watching that transpire with the characters and we're a passive participant. But what do you think is so special about video games when it's the character, the player action to push them through and help them through despair to arrive at the hope compared to just watching it unfold?
I love that you mentioned that because this is something only video games can really do. It puts you in that obviously it puts you in that position, and you feel more immersed because you are controlling Cloud. But what is the most... Because you're right, despair and hope... Despair is as big a theme as hope in this game to me, in the series to me, and that's represented by Sephiroth in multiple ways, and other characters, but primarily him. And he tries to impose that. He tries to... I think in a sort of misery loves company way,
for sure,
just have everyone cede to that. Obviously, there's a ton more to it, but that's a huge part of it. And he makes it, he kind of coaxes and makes it very tempting and sort of welcomes Cloud into the arms of oblivion. And in so doing, the most effective way for a player to feel that and to connect with that despair is to put them in those shoes. So when you are Cloud and he's overtaken by this black materia insanity and he's chasing Aerith and you can't stop him, at all, what better way to illustrate what seems like futility and despair than to put yourself through that, to put the player through that. It's also in the original as well, when he beats up Aerith and you can't control anything about it. In the same point in the story, when he raises his sword, the Buster Sword, while Aerith's playing, like they specifically put you in situations, and I think the main thing there is to have you feel as much as possible what Cloud is feeling to more intimately connect the player with what's going on in a way that games only games can. So I just love that element of it because it's gameplay story integration in a way that helps you feel in the way that, like I said earlier, I couldn't really feel sometimes in the original. That maybe that clears the barrier for some people, or either way, it just makes you connect more with it.
You mentioned Yogācāra, and I want to discuss that briefly. Just from a layman's perspective, can you briefly describe your understanding of Yogācāra as we move into some of the similarities to Rebirth?
So it's funny because the way I got introduced to Yogācāra was just through watching other creators talk about it.
Sure.
After seeing dev notes about it being an inspiration for the world. But layman's terms, I feel free to add to it if I'm forgetting anything essential. But basically, in the most simplest terms, my understanding of it was reality is not defined by the strict terms in which we traditionally view it, in that it isn't necessarily reality is internalized. So the way you view something or the way you view the world around you is directly affected by what you put out into it and your own interpretation, and the way you the way your ideals impact that. So in the context of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I like just a general theory of this is that Zack is potentially, if the Yogācāra is directly tied to the Lifestream, Zack is creating alternate realities through simply his incredible ability to hope and idealize and see these realities, and that's how things branch off. That's a theory for Zack's what Zack's doing when he causes these splintering paths, and that's an implementation of the Yogācāra idea in pretty bare bones terms.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Yogācāra really is, it's a subset of Buddhism in which it's going to combine some psychology and some meditative practices. One of the key tenets of Buddhism specifically is that humanity has clouded eyes, and there's a reality beyond our clouded eyes. And this is why it's so important for Sephiroth to say,
right,
you'll never see with those clouded eyes. It's the idea that he's going to take the scales or the clouds out of Cloud's eyes, for example. But his reality is not the only reality. His is one that is viewed through the lens of despair, through the lens of cynicism, hatred, anguish, pain, suffering. Whereas Aerith is able to see the same reality and offer hope. You really see it in Remake when she has all of her foreknowledge of the future. But you even see it in Rebirth, how she's struggling to maintain that, even without the foreknowledge, which I think is a really cool juxtaposition of, like, if you know everything, then you have this almost Calvinistic hope in the future and assurance that you can move forward. But without it, how do you struggle to get that? And that's Aerith's arc, which I think is so cool. But when it comes to all of these alternate worlds, it's the manifestation of these lenses of hope and despair that are moving forward. And so how is Sephiroth kind of breaking that except by instilling hope and replacing that clouded lens with only a lens of despair? I think that's why I think you called him Glennaroth or Glenova or whatever, where it's Glenn Sephiroth or whatever. I loved that phrase. But he's poaching and spreading malignant despair throughout the world through warmongering and the greed of Shinra and stuff. I think it's a masterful way of giving the entire globe this despair where it's like, death is a homecoming, let's get out of here. So it's almost like they're embracing the meteor, which would be a really interesting piece of part 3 of, like, how can we alleviate this despair? Whereas Aerith offers this other piece, like right at the end of those trials. You did this so masterfully in this, and you also explained how Aerith may have, I'd love for you to describe this to me. Aerith may have created these alternate realities in an effort to save Cloud, like Zack and Biggs's survival, for example. Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of how Aerith, and I think you and I think others like Maximilian Dude and others have called her Omni Aerith, and I love that phrase because you do have an Aerith that is like almost deity-like.
Yeah.
And how does she go about? Like, why would she create these alternate realities, and does she? I mean, go into that, please.
So, basically, by the way, Omni Aerith is all Max Dude. I got it all from him. It's not an original one. But so basically, what I think Aerith is doing, because like you said, at the beginning of Remake, it's clear she knows more. She has this cosmic knowledge. She is arguably She's definitely the closest to Sephiroth, and arguably maybe they're neck and neck. And then she loses that, but that's where she starts. And just throughout both games, there are moments where you can just tell she knows more. They're very deliberate with that. And then there are, like, for example, I always draw attention to the resolution scene in Remake where she tells Cloud not to fall in love with her. There's something like how is she manipulating the Lifestream in that way to show up in his dreams like that. Like, there's a lot going on. Basically, Aerith, I think, sees and knows what Sephiroth is doing, knows what he's trying to curtail, knows what he's trying to bring down upon the world. Stagnant, rot, decay, eternity, everything that antithesis her and the game, the messages of the game. And she's trying to use whatever means at her disposal to basically, in rudimentary terms, not allow the despair threshold to cross the point of no return. At which point Sephiroth will be able to wield the entire Lifestream, fixate himself in the center of it all, and just have the world become a rotting monument to his vengeance and misery. Yeah.
Just look dramatically over his shoulder over and over again.
Exactly.
That's what he does.
And so I think she has to use the metaphysics of the world. Anything she can do to stop this, because ultimately what she's fighting for is what she touts the entire game thematically, which is life. The miseries of life, the positives of life, everything about life is focused in what Aerith is. Positive, negatives, everything. And she is Sephiroth's anti-life. She is just trying to make it so that there is a world so that hope can continue. And so I think that by creating these alternate worlds, creating little pocket dimensions where Zack can fight back, where Zack is alive at all, where Biggs, like she just conjures up Biggs surviving because what I assume to be because he was heroic to her when she was a kid, as we learned through Tales of Two Pasts. Right. Zack is the quintessential hero. And all these people who die that she knows of, who may be able to help to combat against hope, it just adds to that buffer against the despair. Part of that buffer is what I believe is she's doing to Cloud at the end. The limit, the party's limit gauge, maybe Cloud's limit gauge not being activated is the literal thing separating that point of no return.
Right.
Huh.
Who's to say? But my thing is that it's just whatever means possible she can wield with her deific powers, and her omnipotence, or however you want to phrase it, to combat Sephiroth and just keep pushing back the despair. I say a lot of times in the video that the end of Rebirth is not a victory, but it's forestalling Sephiroth's plan, and it's making it so that we don't lose.
I am so glad you brought that up, because that was one of the exclamation points of your video for me, that it is not a victory, but it's a stalling point. As you say, as Aerith says, and you pointed out, he knows that this isn't over at the end. And so we've got a whole part 3 that's just forestalled both his return and just the demise of everything. And so it's really just kind of beginning. Aerith, you've mentioned in your video that Aerith is the crux of this story in Remake and Rebirth. In a lot of ways, she is... I don't want to say she's the central character, but according to certain themes, she certainly is. Talk to us a little bit about the impact of Aerith, particularly when it comes to Cloud's arc, to the entire party, but also the mythos of the Lifestream itself. Could you talk to us about Aerith's importance?
So I think that there's a really interesting tandem between what Zack represents and what Aerith represents. I think that Zack, as a jumping off point for this, Zack is Zack. One of my favorite things about the game is how he's this fallen hero, and part of his arc is having to learn about seeing him at rock bottom and then climbing up from there. Yeah. But a lot of times, you look at Zack and you think of his bravery and his courage and his perseverance in spite of everything. And you don't really think a lot, or at least I don't, of the negatives of life when you think of Zack. You think of the heroism and his, which is kind of ironic because his conclusion in the original in Crisis Core is a negative of life. But Zack is all the beautiful things about life you think about when you think of Zack. Aerith is the same, but she does not at all bypass the brutal realities and the grimness of life. And I think that's so important because the counterpoint to, like, no one can be what Zack is. Like, you look at Zack and it's like, yeah, he can do this, he can fight in this way, but I miss my loved ones. I see nothing but misery in this world. And Aerith's role throughout Re-Trilogy, and, well, in the original too, is to acknowledge everyone's pain, as she is someone who has gone through those very things to a greater extent than most, who has been that lonely, and to acknowledge it, to see it, and to essentially persuade people through her life and through her words and expressions that it is worth it. It's still worth it. It's still worth living. And that as long as there is a world, as long as we're alive, there is always tomorrow, And that is the exact fight back, like the direct diametric opposite of what Sephiroth's doing. He wants everything to last forever. But in a world like that, there is no value in the little things. He wants to avoid pain completely through doing this, but pain is life, and it's part of it. And through a contrast between pain and the little joys, that's where a lot of the meaning can be found. And you don't need to be this eternal monument to the world to have meaning, as Sephiroth is trying to do. All that matters is the moments of joy, the connections you make, and the impact you leave on the people and places that matter. Nothing more than that is really necessary. And so I think this is beautiful through a lot of... I think there's a thematic through line in Rebirth of... well, first of all, what I love that Rebirth does is it adds these little nuanced human flaws to Aerith, of her being jealous of Tifa and Cloud in Nibelheim, or she kind of hints at it in Calm, of her wanting to hurt Hojo, stuff like that. Because it would feel a bit disloyal to her character if she touts about all the negatives and positives of life and she's just a paragon. It really wouldn't work that way. So
that's what they risked in Remake, right? For so often it's like, she knows the plate is going to fall, and it's like, okay, we're going to make it, we're going to go. Okay, and it's like, but she's just steadfast, and I think that's why I really love that the Whispers, and maybe part of Sephiroth's plan, was to disable that foreknowledge ability of Aerith. I think it creates a vulnerability, which in some ways is what she longed for, the ability to love and to lose in some ways. I think that's part of what makes us human, and it's what she longed for, a normal life of sorts. So I don't know. Interesting.
I like that you bring that up, because that vulnerability is something that it's interesting. It's a double-edged sword, because if we're talking about the theory that she is forestalling this through showing Cloud, we'll get into that later, I'm sure. But just to quickly touch on it, through showing Cloud that she is okay and everything's fine, that is antithetical to the way she's lived her life. Right. So, but only Omni Aerith could do that. Only Omni Aerith with those powers and those things can do that, and so that lack of vulnerability adds to the mechanical ways in which she can save the world. But the vulnerability is the heart behind what she's doing. So I think you need both in this match against Sephiroth in a really interesting way.
You're right.
Well, I think Aerith as a character is fascinating and serves an essential function of the story, but she's also one of the most powerful characters in the story, because we kind of don't know what she's capable of, right? And it's done in a way that isn't this kind of Dragon Ball Z-esque power level spike where she just gets stronger as the challenges arise, right? It's really more used as a plot device. Somebody with ancient blood and has all these powers and can access the Lifestream and manifest these realities and all these other things, it seems to me that her biggest strength is actually her ideology and the attitude that manifests the ideology in the way that she carries through the story, because that's what's going to live on after her. There's a story about direct influence and limit breaks and slashing and summons and combos and all this other stuff, but the strongest force, one of the most consistent forces that counters that despair of Sephiroth is that steady pull of Aerith and her ideology and the way that she expresses it. And so I'm curious about how you think that impacts the story, the ideology, but one of the themes is that she attempts the entire time to reframe what victory is in those circumstances. And it's her ideological expression. Hey, listen, victory might not be defeating Sephiroth. Victory might be us being able to survive this plate falling. Victory for you right now, we can't necessarily conquer Sephiroth and Lifestream, but victory for you, Cloud, right now is just not losing your mind and not completely severing or breaking your mind there. And so the way that she expresses that persistent ideology that you can impact the world and that where you impact the world is more important, that it's a contribution to the whole and not all about that big picture where if we don't chop Sephiroth up into little bits, we haven't won. It creates this interesting juxtaposition because as we kind of transition into what she does or doesn't do to Cloud here at the end of the story, which I know that we want to get to. There's this principle of like, what can you accept in the method that you will accept it. For example, there's a story of a bunch of special forces folks rescuing some hostages. And so these hostages have been captured and they're in this dark room and they've been kept in this dark room for a long period of time. And so the special forces folks, they kind of bust into there and they're like, hey, we're here to rescue you. Like, this is it. This is your salvation, right? But they've experienced this deep despair, this conditioning that would come with their circumstances, not too dissimilar to what our characters, specifically Cloud, would experience. And they wouldn't get up because they couldn't trust the reality of what they were seeing. They didn't know if it was a fantasy. And so what the special forces folks had to do was they had to actually shed their gear, shed the very thing that allowed them to break through the obstacle to rescue them, and sit down on the floor with them and be with them to try and understand what they'd been through and engage with their humanity rather than just solving their problem. And then they were able to break through and able to get those folks to be able to be extracted and come with them. Now, the correctness, veracity of that story, obviously it's different. But I think as a point, it illustrates somewhat exactly what Aerith does for me in the way that she engages with Cloud in the party, is that she understands what everyone needs in those moments. She understands what it is. I think it's framed by the farmer when you get out into Junon, and she just uses her words, her positivity, and her ideology to change the entire way that he's living his life. You can slash and hack and spend all the money that you want, but she just understands his plight, engages with empathy, and then corrects him towards right action in a way that's non-judgmental, that I think is her most powerful asset in the story, and I think they use it to tell the story in an amazing way. So now to the question. When it comes to Aerith, what do you think is special about the way that they use her character to be that central crux in this story, especially as you would juxtapose it between Remake and then maybe where we're headed in Part 3?
So kind of jumping onto what we were talking about before, I think a lot of it's in the details. A lot of it's in the details and how authentically it feels like she's able to communicate things in a way that is convincing to the player and to the characters in who look on and listen to her. There are three scenes in Rebirth that I look at as counterparts to one another. There's the speech at the River of Lights, where she literally goes through a bit of an arc in itself there, as she talks about how miserable her life has been, how lonely it's been, and then Cloud encourages her, as long as you choose it.
That smile is creepy. You just say smile. Like...
Yeah. But then she goes, no, you know what? Everything, it's been worthwhile and all that. And the party's looking on and it's great. And and all the lights are released and it's beautiful. The second part of that is No Promises to Keep to me, which I think is, they work in tandem to represent, I guess, how she is able to continue to hope and to not ignore the pains of what could have been, but...
Will you just give a 2-sentence reminder for what that section of the game is for folks?
The River of Lights or the Promise?
Promises to Keep.
So, No Promises to Keep is the performance she sings after...
Perfect.
Yeah, in the Gold Saucer
Day.
Gold Saucer, yeah. And so I think those two work in tandem. And then the last part to it, which I think is a capstone of it, is kind of a summary, which is, you mentioned this before, at the end of the trials, where they have just gone through the most harrowing experiences of their lives, relived them, come out of it miserable, and yeah, she understands it doesn't, nothing is solved by the idea that they're still part of the Lifestream. You can't feel, Barrett can't feel Myrna. He can't see her. He can't suddenly hug her again. But there is value in pushing past that and seeking beauty and value in the world around you and the connections you forged. So I think just the authenticity of how they sell her presentation through how human she is and those negatives, those rough edges, and then how she expresses it all really help to, for me at least, sell you on what she's saying and add a new dimension to it that's different to what we had in the original, which then makes it so shocking when things are seemingly subverted right at the end and you realize how heartbreaking it must be, more for her than anyone else, what she's having to do this. Because she's it's so raw, it's so honest how she communicates this, and then has to go directly against it because of pragmatism. It's just what needs to be done.
You mention in the video, and this is a great lead into this, talking about Aerith and the choices that she has to make. You mention in the video that Aerith, unlike what a lot of people may think, especially from some of the musical motifs, Aerith is not a manifestation of Genova after the death sequence. Instead, it's Aerith. It's at least a version of Aerith. And you also assert that it's possible that Aerith is deceiving Cloud. Why would Aerith deceive Cloud? And you also create a juxtaposition between Sephiroth's deception of Cloud and Aerith's deception of Cloud, and both are deceiving, but for different ends and ideals. Why would Aerith deceive Cloud, and can you explain that a little bit more?
So, something that I think Sephiroth is doing throughout Remake and Rebirth is being very deliberate with the things that he shows the party, but specifically Cloud, to... firstly, make him view the future that they're headed towards in Remake as undesirable, and then as well to tell him like one little viewpoint of his life. You know, you don't cry when people die. You're a husk. All this sort of thing. He is very manipulative, and he also just literally shows him visions throughout. And he tugs him in that direction, and he tries to coax him and says, "Join me." And this, again, misery loves company. Yeah. And so he tries to manipulate him in that way, to pass that despair threshold, I would assume. And what Aerith does is Cloud in the original is able to process Aerith's death, grieve immensely, but deal with it in a healthy way, as healthy as can be in that situation, where he realizes reality, he is enraged by it, he grieves, and it is a very gradual process, and he's messed up in the head, and Sephiroth again takes him to the crater, but ultimately he accepts that that's reality. If Cloud in this game does it with all these extra dimensions added to it, pre-trilogy exclusive, I think Aerith realizes that despair point of no return, that threshold is going to be reached, and Sephiroth's plan will succeed, and they will lose. The world will end as they know it, right there at the end of Rebirth, as she lays dying. There's a lot of circumstances that lead to this, but at that point in the story, I believe she has the Omni-Aerith powers due to the way that the White Materia and the Empty Materia has been transmitted in the background, through the date, and then Aerith giving it to Cloud, and then Cloud giving it to Aerith in the Sleeping Forest, and all that.
So as an aside, can you explain your thoughts regarding the white materia, the clear materia, and potentially even the black materia? But
he called it the empty materia, which I think is
The empty materia, yeah.
Which is different than clear. I haven't heard
certainly
it talked about a lot as the empty materia.
Yeah.
Most people call it the clear materia, that which implies like it is fully whole, just transparent. But it sounds like you might be saying it's actually empty.
Yeah. That it's been emptied out, presumably by the whispers at the end of Remake.
Yes.
Well, those pesky little whispers.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't believe it's a coincidence that Aerith's white materia dwindles out and becomes, like I said, empty. Correlational to how she loses her cosmic knowledge, her the stuff that she knows, and she tells Nanaki literally in Rebirth, I believe in Cosmo Canyon or maybe in Under Junon, that there's nothing in here. The whispers took it, and along with her memories. Yeah. So it's correlational. The white materia being full has to do with her having that knowledge and those memories. It empties out. Then when we get into the date at the beginning of the final chapter, that Omni Aerith, I believe, takes Cloud in, which, again, just as an aside, this is, again, her sort of antithesizing herself a little bit, because this is not reality. This is just sort of wish fulfillment, but it's a cool moment of sort of hypocritical vulnerability just for her heart to be full for a little bit, which I really like. But then at the end of that all, she gives it to Cloud, and she specifically says to him, this is something paraphrasing slightly, this is something to save the world and to save you. And the way she phrases it to me really feels like they're one and the same. Cloud then grabs that. She pushes him through the floor of the church as Sephiroth enters, and Cloud appears in the sleeping forest, sees Aerith as just like he did in the original, and gives her the full white materia that Omni Aerith gave him, and she gives him an empty materia that had been emptied out throughout the course of the two games. Cloud has that now, and in addition to the black materia. So what I think happens there is Cloud imparts to Aerith the abilities that Omni Aerith basically has, which I think gives her the capability to delude him or cloud reality for him, paper over the cracks, in the way that she does at the end of the game, hypothetically making it so that he believes she's alive. So that's the chronology of the white materia, empty materia as I see it, and then how specifically she was able to do that. And through doing that, through him not despairing and seeing her death and the grief and the toll that would have on him, because I believe he would crack, it's able to forestall the end of the world, but it breaks her heart because she is literally lying to Cloud and also causing something that causes immense distress for her beloved friends too.
Why do you think that Cloud's breaking is conducive to the end of the world? I'm thinking, my question is rooted in this idea of psychology and really therapy that says sometimes it's okay to break, and sometimes, just feel the feelings. Why is Aerith forestalling Cloud's breaking when that could be redemptive for him? Is there a connection there?
I think it could absolutely be redemptive for him, and I think that's why. Obviously, this is subtextual. This is very interpretive.
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
I don't think the game shows us in anything other than expressions. But that's why I think it's heartbreaking for her to have to do this, because it's immensely painful. It's going to be raw. It's the most difficult thing in the world. But that's what she knows is important, to live in reality and feel that pain. So I just think, ultimately, I think that Sephiroth had her a step away from checkmate. And she had to do something antithetical to literally just make it so that they could live another day, so that Cloud could live another day, and so that there was the tiniest glimmer of hope. Yeah. I think she just had no other choice, really. And so in a split-second decision, she has to do something that undercuts her heart. But that tragedy of that is incredibly... that is something that really connected me to her and just sealed the deal that she's my favorite character in the Re-Trilogy, because the conviction to have to do that, if that ends up being correct, is so it's not it's unable to, it's hard to express in words what it means to go against every fiber of your being in doing something, knowing that it's wrong in every way, but you have to do it. Like, there's something profound about that.
But to what extent do you think that's impacted by her time with Avalanche? Because I think that I'm thinking about, they're a terrorist cell, and they take actions that they normally wouldn't take to achieve a result that they couldn't achieve otherwise. And she typically balances that throughout the story. But then in this moment where she has to decide what she's going to do, she acts a little bit more like the characters of Avalanche do, and the plight that they have against Shinra in order to save the broader world at that point in that critical juncture. I wonder what you think about that kind of reciprocal relationship between the two of them. I hadn't really thought about it in that way until you kind of talked about it. But we always talk about Aerith's exerting her influence on everyone else, but we very rarely talk about how everyone has influenced potentially Aerith.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I think you look at a couple of things click if you think about it that way. Like, what she has to do, she realizes in the moment, I have to do something that is totally opposite to me. I have to do something that is something similar to what Sephiroth would do to manipulate people.
Yeah.
What is everything that I've been fighting against? Convincing the party that it's worth hoping. And so maybe she is able to use some of the logic or the feelings that the party have felt through her exposure with them to then go, okay, this is going to forestall this for Cloud in the moment, because this is what I've been telling people is wrong, or not wrong, but unhealthy, not the way to move forward. But we cannot, if Cloud is to move forward and feel this as keenly as he could, this could be the end. So I need to learn exactly what I've been arguing against, and she's been intimately arguing against it, and use that as a safeguard in a really ironic sort of way.
Because if Sephiroth is allowed to manipulate his intentionality and his reality for evil purposes, then she doesn't want to manipulate him necessarily, but she says, well, if he's going to do it for evil, maybe I have to do this for good for now. And it feels like she's definitely coming up against kind of a personal boundary with kind of her own ethic there, as you've described it.
Yeah, and because, again, an important thing to mention is that I don't think this is for sure what's going on. I just view it as the most likely for a bunch of reasons, and I view it as the most compelling on a narrative level, because of all the complexities and emotions and nuances there, and how beautifully it sets the stage. But and one of my things, the things I say in my video, is that a big part of the evidence like this for this, and what I mentioned earlier, is the feel of it. The music, the tonality, the direction, the expressions.
It's menacing, yeah.
It's menacing when she comes out after the burial, right?
Right.
And that is the biggest counterpoint against this, I think, is that it is horrifying. But then you go to the final scene by the Bronco.
Right.
And she is, maybe I'm being gaslit, I don't know. But to me, she's warm, the music's beautiful, no promises to keep plays at the end. Her expressions are so soft and full of love and care, and she feels like this guardian angel. And, the way she sort of caresses Nanaki, and he feels her warmth.
He senses her,
yes.
Not necessarily Sephiroth or Jenova.
Yes, and just the overall tone and feel of that feels like our Aerith. So maybe the horrifying tone earlier is just like, oh my God, Cloud is like he is being held together by tape,
Right.
And this is a horrible thing to happen, and oh my gosh, Aerith is having to do this. Or maybe we live in a world where there's a tug of war. Maybe on one in that scene that is Jenova or Sephiroth. And then in the last scene, it is Aerith, and there's kind of a tug of war there. But I kind of think that falls apart a little bit, or not falls apart.
I think it does too.
Like,
I don't think it's cohesive.
It's not super cohesive, because why would Sephiroth do that? Like, it's counterproductive to his plan.
Right. It strikes me that Cloud is as empty as the materia. He's a husk, a hollow husk of himself. Something that came up in one of my live streams recently, we were talking about the different trailers and how the very first reveal trailer of Remake, you've got Cloud following Barret. So this idea of Cloud following Avalanche and the whole Midgar arc. And in Rebirth, it's Cloud. The teaser trailer for Rebirth is Cloud following Sephiroth, and you've got this whole overture. And it really strikes me that it's possible that whatever teaser we would get, or at least the theme of Part 3, could be Cloud following Aerith. And it's the idea of, like, how can I get back to her? And is it through the destruction of the world through Sephiroth, or with Sephiroth, or is it through something else? But I'm particularly curious about how this husk of Cloud and husk of a materia, holy materia, are going to really manifest and be filled by the end. And I think the live stream sequence, all of this kind of stuff, is going to be important. You mentioned in your video, and I know that I keep drawing quotes. I don't know if you had the intentionality of each of these phrases, but they meant something to me, so I'm bringing them up. But you mentioned that it's interesting that in this telling, the holy materia does not appear to simply be imbued with some kind of divine holy magic, but instead it's that the power of holy seems to be tied to the ideals, the hopes, the dreams, the memories, past, present, and future, that people hold. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because that, for a religious studies professor, that is like a beautiful sentiment that I'm really curious where that came from and what you might think is happening with that.
Yeah, no, that was definitely intentional, because I think
because it was beautiful.
I don't remember. I have no recollection of that. Yeah. Next question.
No. In seriousness, like what I love about, one of my favorite things about Rebirth is how it takes concepts that are more simplistic or have a bit less to them and adds these beautiful human, important, profound layers to them. The Gi is a great example, and this, like the materia in general, has so much more layers added to them and profundity added to them. And holy materia, like you said, it is imbued by the sum of the collective hopes and dreams and ideals and wishes of humanity. And as I guess a bit of an aside to this, one of the most horrifying things I see in stories sometimes is, it doesn't happen super often, but when it does, I find it tragic, is when, like, a trove of knowledge or a library with forbidden knowledge or really, like, secrets gathered and chronicled throughout the ages is burned down or destroyed or lost to time. Because though I think there's a great idea in that spiritually, historically, we are now the sum of everything that has come before us. And that is directly integrated into all the characters. I think that's very important for Cloud, and when he's to find his answer in the Lifestream, he's going to have to, in excruciating detail, look at the sum of everything he's experienced. Yes. Tifa goes through it in Rebirth. Aerith talks about it throughout Rebirth. All the party go through that, through the trials. But more than that, I think the White Materia is indicative and representative of, through it being what Aerith knows, everything that encapsulates humanity up till this point. That's the knowledge, the hopes, the emotions, the dreams, everything that is, in every aspect of it is necessary for survival and hope going forward. And that's why I think it's so essential to keep hold of this, and why it's so, I felt a desperate yearning to know where it was at any given point throughout the game. Because I think it is that sum. It is, and that sum is greater than the sum of its parts. It represents all of that, and that's part of why losing it is so desperate for Aerith. That's why she's so preoccupied with it. And just, I think it's representative of basically what you said, all of that, all of the above. And to find the way forward, the knowledge and hope and ideals and wishes, a cavalcade of all of that, is genuine power against the opposite of that, the void, which is what Sephiroth represents, and I think part of what the Black Materia represents. And they have a great dynamic there. And I think that's completely Re-Trilogy exclusive, which is awesome.
Well, if the original game described the Black Materia as the ultimate destructive materia, and holy is almost the antithesis of that, therefore it's the ultimate creative materia, creation materia in some ways, it is interesting to link these to ideals and hopes and despair, respectively, right? And I wonder what that might say to us individually. We could continue talking about all the minutiae because, there's so much to talk about here. But for the everyday audience member, somebody that's playing through this game, why do you think these themes matter? We always want to engage and challenge our audience to think about games and the themes and stories of games in ways that they might integrate into their own lives. Based on Rebirth, what's a basic philosophy of life and hope and happiness that you can kind of deduce and say, this is what I've learned personally from this experience?
Yeah. What's the meaning of life, AJ?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
So I was going to make a joke about seeing a beautiful Aerith-looking person in your mind. That's the meaning of life.
That is the core goal.
I think what I take away most from it, it's the more you go through life, I think the harder it is for stories to teach you new things. But what I think Rebirth does is express things that I believe or have seen before in very unique ways. Ways that I haven't seen before that gives me greater appreciation for those ideas. And so I think what anyone can take away from it is, because the average person may not think what I think about Aerith, that she's intentionally doing this for Cloud. Someone may not even want to dig into why he sees her. Maybe people think it's Sephiroth. Maybe people think he's just seeing visions or whatever. So even without those specifics, I think what the game hammers in is that it all comes down to Sephiroth, because I think more so than the vast majority of stories I've seen, the villain or the antagonist is always the antithesis. But with Sephiroth in Re-Trilogy, it is times 1,000. Everything he says, I think you can then go backwards and go, okay, what is the opposite of this? And that is something you can understand that the game is saying. And with how often Sephiroth talks and how much you see what he's doing and how Aerith goes against him, I think what's clear is just that it is just an advocation for unfiltered life, an advocation for honest life, and not... One of my favorite things about Rebirth is that it does not sugarcoat anything about anything to do with life, about sadness, misery, negativity, anger, grief. Everyone feels these things. It is just dishonest to avoid that or pretend like it doesn't exist. And throughout the entire body of work, what is clear to, I think, anyone who plays it is that as long as we're alive, and as long as we accept a fine balance between accepting the negatives of reality, but still seeing possibility in the beauties of life, in the little things, there is possibility. There is a reason to keep going. And I think that's something that can get across no matter whether you're casual or super into looking at the tiniest details, and it's baked into every element of the game design. The developers said that connections is one of the most important, is the theme of Rebirth. Connections to the world, connections to people, and those things pushing you forward. It's in the mini games, the incredible amount of mini games that some people don't like, but nonetheless, all the little moments, the moments of Tifa and Aerith, trying on the uniforms and being goofy and silly with it. Barrett with a sailor's outfit. Nanaki dancing on the boat with prior to the Queen's Blood tournament finale. Like, these little moments, they're the things that stick out the most, and they're the things that provide us with the means to propel forward. And I think just anyone could look back at the experience and see that that's what matters most, and those are the things that have the biggest impact, and they are a buffer to that sort of despair threshold.
Well, I love that phrase, the unfiltered and honest life. I love that. Whether it is mini games and levity and recreation, or whether it is sadness and sorrow and pain, but this unfiltered life, that's a phrase that I want to stick with me. So thank you for that, AJ.
Of course.
I love the way that it connects directly back to that theme of hope in the midst of doom, or despair, as we've talked about. And this game asks a lot of the player to engage with these concepts. It does. It does. But it is able to go places that I think other stories want to get to because of that. But it does. It's a little less approachable,
for sure,
than some other things, and it asks a lot of commitment. But I think that conversations like this and your work help folks to connect with kind of what those takeaways are. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us and share your thoughts, and we just really appreciate it. It's been a real treat to get to know you and to get to hear kind of your perspectives on this, and I look forward to hearing many, many others.
Absolutely. AJ, you have been a delight. I knew from your video that you were thorough, but just this conversation, I mean, you're brilliant. I mean, you have so much wealth of knowledge and experience that you're able to bring into conversations about video games, and that's something that I just deeply appreciate. So thank you so much for that. Where can people find you? What do you have coming up next that we can be excited about?
Well, first of all, thank you to both of you for having me. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I am just filled to the brim with stuff to talk about for this game, and I tend to do collaborations about anime rather than video games. I've only done one about Rebirth, so this is a joy for me, and I loved hearing your guys' perspectives too, and thank you. Like, it was great. I had so much fun.
You are welcome anytime. We'll talk about anime with you. You are just a delight, so thank you.
Appreciate it. So people can find me. My name is spelled strangely without the change I made to it for my Twitch and YouTube label. But my username is ALECZANDXR. I'm on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Discord, everything. And coming up, I have lots of retro. In terms of stream games, I'm currently going through the first time the Metal Gear Solid series,
nice.
Resident Evil series. Like, I did 1 to 3. I'm waiting for Volume 2 so I can play 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So that's on the horizon. I want to get into Metaphor. I'm probably going to be playing that.
I'm finishing it up right now.
Yeah?
You're gonna love it.
I can't wait. I think I saw you tweeting about it. So I'm going to be doing Metaphor Blind in the future. That's on my Twitch, of course. Lots of video games planned for the future of all sorts of variety. And then on YouTube for video essay stuff, I just finished the Yogācāra series, or Like a Dragon.
All right.
And I haven't touched it yet.
It's amazing. Tons of ideas and awesome characters and moments there. I have a full series retrospective coming out. Not 9 hours, but about 1. That's
1
coming
hour
out. 1
for
hour
the series and 9 hours for Rebirth. That's impressive. So
I had to for my own sanity be much more brief. But the series merits it. Just to be clear.
for sure.
It's that was tons of fun to put together. I have an anime video coming out soon, and lots on the horizon. I don't tend to do lots of in-between stuff for Final Fantasy VII, just because I put everything when the games release. My remake video was 3.5 hours or so. This one's 9. I can't
wait for part 3.
Yeah.
It's going to be 24 hours,
I
baby.
know.
Let's go.
So probably not going to be much content on YouTube for it until part 3 releases.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I do tweet about it, talk about it on stream as well. And I also do this fun thing on Twitch where every year I'm really compulsively obsessed with ranking stuff. So every year, I rank my top 100 fiction of all time.
Ooh.
And just like make note of the changes, any new entries, any drops, and people have fun guessing what's going to end up on top. So I'm going to be doing that maybe March, April or so.
Oh,
That's
wow.
really fun.
Yeah.
I love that. Can't wait to see that.
It's very cool. Well, we can't thank you enough for being on here.
Yes.
Everybody go check out AJ Aleczandxr. The link is in the description below. Go and send all of the love subs, and then watch all of the videos and stuff. It's perfect for a commute. That's how I dissected and digested all of this stuff. So I would drive 2 hours and be like, there's another chunk, and it was just brilliant every time. So go check him out. Also, remember that we do release Final Fantasy content on Fridays periodically, Final Fantasy Friday stuff for us. So continue to check that out, as well as our other lecture series throughout the year. And with that, my friends, as always, walk tall and let's mosey. See ya.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, AJ.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks to AJ for the interview. Thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for our graphics. And most of all, thanks to you. This interview is brought to you by viewers like you, and we appreciate you paying attention. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye-bye.